Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ. The Uncommon Good.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
And we are coming to you live from these United States of America. I am in Des Moines, Iowa, in the Mercy One studios here at Iowa Catholic Radio. I do a couple things out here in the good old Des Moines area. I'm the director of mission and ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the director of the Zeta Institute for Foundation and Ethics and Leaderships. You can find us at mchs.edu and zetainstitute.com. But out in Pittsburgh, what do you guys do out there?
I'm directing the National Institute for Newman Studies, and you can find all about NINS at newmanstudies.org.
And, Bud, how is life treating you post-Easter? You still, I know that we've had the entire week. We've had Mercy Sunday. Now we're going into the Easter season, but want to make sure people realize that although the hardcore 8 days of partying are over, we're still joyously living in the Eastern season. Are you still happening to find old Easter eggs that you have hidden?
Oh, yeah. My soul has some rough edges. So, when it comes to Lent, my perception of fasting, it's all I can find some different ways about sneaking in, a meat or something. But Easter season, I'm like, feast, so still binging.
I like the idea of you running around, waking up your children and scaring them, just yelling feast at them.
Feast.
So I hope that
they get into it too. Yeah.
I hope that's true. If you need to print out large signs that say feast on it so that everybody knows what's going on in case they happen to start to put down that donut, easy place to do that. Go to Cartridge World, who underwrites our show. Cartridge World, 8173rd Windsor Heights. They have all of your printing needs. Maybe if you need to print out the recipes for, I'm imagining these 7-course meals that you make Rachel prepare during the Easter season, Bud.
Yeah, we do have to track our meal plans, and my daughter Malin has started printing the Marr Insider, which is a weekly newspaper detailing our family business.
Right.
So printing needs are pretty constant in the Marr household.
Yeah, Cartridge World is the way to do that. I'm actually starting to, I can't wait till she turns into the investigative reporter that starts showing the dark underbelly of the Marr household. So I'll be looking for those issues.
Or the brooding teenager stage, and it has this Nietzschean nihilism or something.
It's going to be great.
I miss the old, just sunshiny Marr Insiders.
Also brought to you, as always, by Mercy College of Health Science, who underwrites our show. We had graduation. We had our break, so it's getting ready to be the summer semester. That's one of the wonderful things about Mercy College, mchs.edu, is you can get started fall, spring, or summer, and they get you out there quick because they know, as much as we love our students, that the world needs them even more. So mchs.edu, Mercy College, a wonderful underwriter of our show.
Do you guys keep up the Faith and Healing speaker series during the summer? Does that take a little bit of a rest?
Yeah, we take a hiatus during the summer, but we have some big ones coming up soon, so hopefully we get to advertise that. But I know that we working on and getting ready to almost cement some of these speakers. So today, speaking of speakers, we have an all-star that's been on the show quite a few times, Steve Wichmer, the Catholic movie guy. Bud and I have both had the great privilege to be on his show to talk about the movies. I think we're going to hint at that a bit, Bud, but it's always a good time of year to wrap up the movies that have came out during the chilly months of winter, and summer gets to start rolling around. He always has wonderful things to say about the movies, so looking forward to hearing from Steve.
These shows always make me a little bit anxious because I love a good movie, but I feel like I don't keep up with them in the same way that you and Steve do. So I don't want to give the impression that you guys spend your entire adult lives watching movies, but I generally wait till Netflix or DVD, which means that I'm not quite as adept at the water cooler conversations.
Yeah, Steve and I think, are part of that group that will ruin sleep habits in order to get to watch the movies that we want to watch. I will say, ever since MoviePass went away, even Steve and I, we pale in comparison to the movie-devouring machines that we had become for a while.
I don't know why MoviePass didn't make it. It seemed like such a good business model.
Pay far less than the movies you're going to watch, and I don't know where it very much was Step 1, do Movie Pass. Step 2, they didn't think about it. Step 3, success. Yeah, that was very much on this one.
Were they promising theaters that these people would spend all that extra dough on like popcorn and soda, and it just didn't pan out?
I think that's what they tried. I don't think movie theaters really even cared to listen. It seems like AMC and a few people kind of like are doing their own version, but it is one of those deals where, as cool as something might seem, you got to go like, well,
Yeah.
you know, you got a newborn, and people get all mad when the newborn's screaming in a movie.
There does seem, I think there would have to be a middle road. Like I could see, like you're saying, certain theaters offering this kind of like discounted rate to folks who go like 5 or 6 times each month, you know. But Movie Pass, it felt like just like, pay $5, watch unlimited films.
No, right. It was absolutely nuts. It was one of those bandit corporations where you're like, I'm watching a movie on some millionaire's dime who decided to invest in this, and I did not feel too bad. But this is my question to you. Why we have 1 minute before we go to the first break. What is the last movie you saw in theaters?
Well, there are ones that we marked the calendar for.
Oh.
So, like Madeline has inherited my love for Star Wars.
I see.
So we do go out of our way to see. I think it was Last Jedi. It was the last one I saw in the theater.
Is that what's part of like making you hesitant to ever go back? No, I'm teasing. No, Mike.
Ooh, we just lost a certain portion of the audience.
The problem is like my kids are really getting into movies now, especially Marvel ones, and I'm like, so I've just consigned a lot of my future income to spending money on multiple children going. Well, as you can tell, this is a fun topic. It's going to be great. So for Bud, this is Bo, the Uncommon Good. We got to go to commercial here. When we come back, Steve Wichmer, the Catholic movie guy. It's going to be a fantastic discussion. You'll want to stick around. This is the Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. We're back with the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Happy to be with you on this Wednesday. We have a very special guest. I think maybe the most all-star guest of all all-star guests, Steve Wichmer, the Catholic movie guy. Steve, thanks for joining us again on the Uncommon Good.
No, thank you for having me. I'm a glue guy. You know, when you need to piece the show together somehow, I'm always on like the bat phone. You know, ready to jump in there.
I think this is like your 13th time on the show, so either between 3 and 13, somewhere around there.
Something like that.
Well, it's good to have you back on the show, and of course, whenever we have Steve on the show, because he's the Catholic movie guy, we like to talk about movies, not only what's coming up and maybe giving you suggestions for the summer about what you should watch, but also to dive into what is it about movies that play such an important role in the social fabric of our lives. Steve, one more, introductory pitch for people who maybe haven't got to hear you on the show. Why do you think the movies, or the films, if you're trying to brag, play such an important role? Why do you think why does there need to be a Catholic movie guy talking about those movies?
Well, well, of course, first and foremost, I love them, but also, I mean, the visual medium obviously is powerful and it's all-encompassing, so it captures your attention in a way that, maybe a better way, maybe a worse way than, say, a book, where you have to provide some of the, imagining yourself. It hits you in the face, and therefore, it's even more important, I think, to have a well-formed, not only Catholic conscience, but a way of interpreting and interacting with film, so that you're not just a kind of passive victim to film, but that you interact with it and are able to process it in a way that allows you to, kind of sift through the good and the bad. And I think there's a reason that films and television to another extent now are so powerful and so much a part of our culture, whatever we can call our culture. They resonate and move the human spirit, and therefore it's good that you as a viewer are ready to take the good and leave the bad.
Hey, Steve, with what you were saying there about like visual media, I like a good like sort of irrational apologetics take for Catholicism. And at one point I heard someone say that like there's a disproportionate amount of Catholic filmmakers, and I've never actually taken the time to research this and figure out if that's true or not. But like that, you think about someone like Martin Scorsese. I mean, a lot of them are fallen away Catholics, but sort of the sacramental imagination and growing up and seeing, like the, for lack of a better term, like the pomp and circumstance of the liturgy, sort of prepares a person to think about conveying great ideas through film. Have you ever looked into this, or am I just completely off base?
Steve, can you please do research for us?
I'm doing it right now. I'm on Microsoft Encarta doing the heavy lifting for me.
Encarta.
In all seriousness, so this is kind of a running joke amongst people that know me, and I've had this conversation with Bo, but I just kind of have this theory that anyone who's truly great at anything is secretly Catholic, and that's completely indefensible on one level, and probably would get me in trouble with the PC police. But on another level, it isn't, because basically what is Catholicism? It's truth. It's the truth of existence, and therefore anyone who has more exposure to the essential truths that are visible in the liturgy or wherever they're visible, that reveal to us what the truth of existence is, then of course they would have a better shot at producing great art, because the greatest art is true, beautiful, and good. And so, that doesn't surprise me. And Scorsese is a great example where you have someone who, putatively or at least outwardly has fallen away Catholic or on the very periphery of Catholicism, and even has made, one movie which I would say is probably just blasphemy in the Last Temptation of Christ. But he still is able, and he can't really totally subvert the knowledge he has of human existence, and in a way it comes through in every work of art, even that movie, and it has something to contribute to our understanding and to human existence and great art. So that's a great example, actually.
I did a quick Google search, and
Encarta coming through.
Alfred Hitchcock,
you can't
Catholic.
trust Google. Encarta's where it's at.
Alfred Hitchcock, Catholic. Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah.
Woody Allen, Jewish.
And that goes to the other thing. I would say if most great filmmakers that I know of are either Catholic or Jewish, and since we know that the Jewish religion is part and parcel of true Catholicism in a sense of the fulfillment of the Old Testament, and of course the Old Testament itself has much wisdom to teach us, and that doesn't surprise me either, but it's kind of going with that same thing. The more you know about true existence, the better art you'll create.
And then if you're lucky and you listen to... I was on Steve's podcast about the Ballad of Buster Scruggs. We'll just decide people really are Catholic without knowing, like the Coen brothers. Because otherwise, how do you make that movie? But that's a whole other thing besides. One of the things that I wanted to bring up is... I wanted to bring it back to an important subject about my life and how I'm raising my kids, and just, air this out with you guys. No, we're talking about truth and the sort of way in which the medium of a film or like any art really gets at these perennial truths. And so my kids, all of a sudden it seemed like, they liked Avengers, they, watched this, that movie. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it's just that when Avengers Endgame, which over its first weekend made over $1 billion, so listener, I'm sure you kind of have an idea about what I'm talking about, whether you've seen it or not. I guess when that started ramping up, that it was all going to end, they went nuts and decided they wanted to watch every single movie in the Marvel Universe, and I think we accomplished it. And it starts to be interesting, right? Because on one hand, I don't feel bad about this. What is it? Stratford Cattlecott, before he passed away, he loved all the Marvel movies, and he has wonderful things to say about the liturgy and everything like that. Second Spring over in Britain, if anybody has a chance to go read their stuff. So I'm not defending myself here. What I'm saying is there seems to be an interesting way in which the power of these stories starts to form the imagination, and that's all great and good. But then you start looking at, when we reached, the research I did for this show was not looking into Encarta, but just noticing what movies came out in 2019. And I know we've been talking about this for years, but in 2019, guys, I think 95% of all movies are either sequels, remakes, reboots, or just from books. I don't know if I've seen an original, just storyline among any of the movies that are being hard-pressed. Now, a lot of people would throw out that means that we are, an unoriginal age and we can't think of anything creative. But on the other hand, if you do things like read way too much medieval literature, you realize those guys almost always are either making new versions of stories they've read somewhere else. Chaucer, for instance, really looks at the Decameron, right, and he retells stories from that. But a lot of those stories are also retellings of certain tropes. So, like Noah and his wives, or, the various ideas about, certain magic tricks, or even different tales within the Canterbury Tales are sort of tales that when they started to get told, people would immediately know how the story went, but they'd be interested to hear how the author took a different spin on it. So I guess the really open-ended question, Steve, as the resident expert I'm going to throw out at this point about the movies, are we just doing what people have been doing since the Middle Ages by recycling stories, or is there something else going on that it seems like every single movie is either a reboot, a remake, or a sequel?
So there's a ton to unpack there. I want to just thank you for acknowledging my expertise.
You're welcome.
I think that this is just a great testament to the power of just saying something, and therefore the power of the movies. Like, I just call myself the Catholic movie guy, and then I am, and we just have these things, and we kind of speak these movies into existence, and then they are stories for our generation.
There you go.
So I think in 2019 what you're saying is it's kind of both, right? Like, one, I think. We kind of are out of ideas isn't exactly how I would say it, but I would say we may be out of ideas that everyone can get behind. You see this in politics, and just social media and Twitter, and then it's a very fractured age. It's kind of the balkanization of American idealism. I don't know. I don't know. It seems like I think everyone feels this way. The country's kind of coming apart. And so, if that's the case, then you're going to have two results. You're going to have these incredible niche markets for weird or out there ideas. Like, think of, say, the show Transparent, right, which could have been not even thinkable maybe a decade ago.
Right.
And all the acclaim it gets from a very small section of the population, maybe the elites of the population, but that most people wouldn't have no idea what I'm even talking about, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have, on the other hand, these huge mass entertainment properties or remakes, because that's something that everyone has some familiarity with, has some nostalgia with, and has no objection to. So that's why you see the Star Wars coming back, and then breaking off from that with these smaller stories becomes possible only because the people have already kind of given the inch on, I remember Star Wars. Yeah, everybody loved that.
It's like they were vetted or something. Like that's the only thing that people trust to put all this money into.
Right, and you see that with the Marvel Universe even within it. You have like the huge properties that everybody sees and everybody knows, because everybody knows at least one of the Avengers, and they have some sort of common experience with them, and who could be against Captain America. And then you have from there the ability to tell more interesting or at least weirder stories maybe in the periphery of the universe, like with these straight to Netflix shows of smaller characters or different types of presentations. So I think that's one of the biggest reasons we're having that right now, and I think that's why this thing has made $1 billion already, and we're just out of the weekend, because it might be the last hurrah for this kind of a thing. I don't know.
Well, this came up with the most recent Star Wars installments, where Episode 7 really felt like a rehash of a great story, and Episode 8 it took things in a very different direction. I feel like it almost laid the groundwork for going like a total different way with the series. Do you guys think like it kind of feels like we almost have canons with some great film installments now, that there's this idea like you have to follow certain tracks?
Yeah, I think that and then that's a whole other question about like the newest one, Star Wars 9 or whatever they're calling it, like Electric Boogaloo 2, or I forget what the subtitle is, but they're really starting. They also. J.J. Abrams is back on this, so now there's this huge sort of idea like, well, actually they're backing off how radical they were trying to go with the 8th one, and now the 9th one is like, remember this. But, this starts to be interesting. Three guys here on the radio, I think we'd all be accused of lacking the old traditions compared to some people. It's like maybe masses we go to, the very fact we're Catholic. So the fact that there might be canons or even sort of genre signposts that we expect from movies, that really shouldn't scare, nerds who like traditional art. I mean, it's the same thing with like iconography or even like painting, right? Like if you're going to paint the Annunciation, there's certain things that we think like, you should make sure to hit. That starts to be the interesting thing, is how much of this is just, because it's superheroes, we think it's radically different than, Michelangelo pointing back to things that everybody would recognize in a scene. Or how much of this is, I think what Steve is talking about, is in a world where we've lost any sort of common concourse. Otherwise, all we have is, remember the 80s when, you could do brave movies because you wouldn't lose as much money, and that's what we all remember as these few characters. So I don't know. Like, are they canons or are they? Is it propaganda? Steve solved this.
Well, again, man, there's so many things I want to talk about. I probably will forget what I'm talking about halfway through, so feel free to jump in. But I think that there's a couple aspects there, which is one, as society breaks down, these properties like Star Wars, and to a lesser extent maybe comic book movies, become sort of a substitute for a religious instinct, or an outlet maybe for a religious instinct, and that's where you get into these fan people who dress up, who attend events. It's almost ritualistic, and therefore, of course, if something is not proper with the lore, then it's almost akin to heresy. So I think that's one interesting aspect.
Right.
The other thing is, though, it's just human nature. I mean, at a certain point, no one cares about preferences. Like, does it really matter what costume someone's wearing versus this, or what color? No, but at a certain point, it touches the essence of what makes the story and why the story is popular. So I think that that instinct that people have is not necessarily wrong. One of the famous sayings, in matters of taste, there's no accounting for taste, basically. Well, that's true if you're talking about, like, I don't know, whether cherry's better than strawberry, but if you're saying whether cherry's better than bleach, well, I think objectively it is. So that's kind of what
I don't know.
I don't know. It's a tough.
We're really throwing the hard truths out here on the show today.
Please don't donate to my Patreon, but. Yeah, no, I think and that's what these things get to. At a certain point, you're ruining the movie or ruining what it's about. For example, with this Last Jedi business, a lot of people felt that way, and even I kind of do, really too. But I think because it was well made and because it was kind of time for maybe an interesting idea change, that's kind of why I was not as upset, or maybe I'm just not as tied down to Star Wars as some other people. But I think that impulse is just human nature, and it's understandable, if sometimes regrettable, the extent that it plays out.
I actually think, real quick, I think it was one of my kids pointed out that the reason Rogue One is the best one so far is, like, the most people die in it, and I'm like, that's very dark, but probably perceptive. Now, Bud is the king of asking the best questions at the end of the first. So we have about 4 minutes. Is this a 4-minute question, or is this the beginning of what we're going to cover in the second segment?
No, excuse me. I think the latter. It's pretty open-ended, but we're talking about recycling some ideas, or retreading even great franchises. And looking at the slate of movies that were honored this past year, I felt like some good films came out, but on the whole, it was maybe a disappointing year. Like, just looking at the Oscars webpage, Bohemian Rhapsody, I heard, was sort of underwhelming, or like The Green Book was fried green tomatoes, sort of like with things shifted around a bit.
And like really problematic to certain sectors of
I know
the population.
Don Shirley's family did not like it, yeah. But I mean, on the whole, was it a disappointing year, or am I painting with too broad of strokes?
Again, you are incredibly keen in your final question, but just a masterful question. Because I think the Oscar nominee list is kind of like, well, we can't really nominate all superhero movies, although there was one nominated. So we're going to try to find all these things that people like and that aren't offensive. So, like, The Green Book is a feel-good racial story, so that's why it gets nominated. And it's been, competently made or whatever, even though, it's problematic. Even that word, problematic, is kind of a newer word that just means, like, well, somebody doesn't like it, somebody's offended. Same thing with Bohemian Rhapsody. Everyone heard Bohemian Rhapsody on the radio back in the day, or they heard it in Wayne's World 20 years ago.
Right.
So
thank you, Wayne's World.
Everyone's gonna like this movie. It's basically like a behind the music, really well done and dramatized to the max. It's just, these are all kind of bland and inoffensive things. Whereas the best movie that actually came out last year, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, and I'm sure that Bo would agree with me on that.
1,000%.
That's not safe at all. That's really weird. There's 6 different short stories in one movie. Is it an anthology or is it a movie? It's about the Old West, but it's really not a traditional Western in a sense. And every movie has abrupt tonal shifts, and you have like extreme violence and then extreme piety and extreme nothing happening, and then things are all over the place, and it ends with an allegory. It's just all over the place. So that's not going to get nominated for Academy Award because, I don't know if people all understand it, but it's not something that everyone can agree on, like, oh, this is safe and this is good, and it'll get us cred with the people that we need to get cred with. So I don't know if movies are getting worse, or simply the movies we get told are good are getting worse. I think that is the case.
I think it's fair to say that there's kind of a paint by numbers with the Oscar nominations, where they have to cover, like you said, like certain political bases to feel like they've got a good show. Yeah.
the reason for that is they got so much blowback for not doing it, and some of that, of course, is overblown now because everything is. But there is some truth that in the past, I mean, of course, things weren't recognized that should have been, but then it becomes just a rote thing of, okay, we need to check the box and make sure one of each type of film gets thing, and then that you get limited. So I think it's a little bit of both to me.
Yeah, and I was checking over this with like 2018 movies. There were fantastic 2018 movies. We're getting ready to go to the break, so we can talk about it more. But if I have a top 5, I was like compiling this for Steve: The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, A Quiet Place, Into the Spider-Verse, Sorry to Bother You, and Blaze. All fantastic movies. I think only Into the Spider-Verse whiffing anything from the Oscars, maybe A Quiet Place. And I'll be honest, that's without even including Marvel movies because I kind of excluded those. But then like Incredibles 2 came out, Isle of the Dogs. Like there's all sorts of really great movies out there. But I think to Steve's point, maybe we shouldn't be listening to the elites for our help. So this is The Uncommon Good. We're going to be back right after these messages. Stick around. I'm Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr, and our buddy Steve Wichmer, the Catholic movie guy. We will be back after these messages. We're back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. We have our distinguished, noble, expert, all-star guest, Steve Wichmer, the Catholic movie guy, joining us. Welcome back to the show, Steve.
Thank you for having me. I am very distinguished.
Hey, could I jump in real quick?
Uh-oh.
Yeah. When the weather gets warmer, do you guys get kind of that... When you were in high school, it felt like this time of year you'd hear like the big blockbusters that were going to come out during the summer.
Right.
It's sort of I feel like we're doing the movie show at an appropriate time.
Agree.
Theater goers, like, what's the best time of year to grab a film in the theater?
Well, I'll say for our family, like we like trying to find the few drive-ins that still exist, especially in the summer, and get to go watch whatever. And especially when you have 5 kids and the younger 3 have to use the bathroom a lot. That's like the perfect setup, basically, to go do that. So I really love doing that.
Does it weird them out that you and Robin are making out in the back seat?
Yeah, no, that's I'm watching the movie. I don't even like order refreshments when it's movie time, bud. Like I'm there to watch the movie.
Well, I have to say you've hit on it. You're not a Catholic movie guy, bud, so you probably don't hear it. But I actually hear like a siren call at this time of year. It says, "Go to the movies, go to the movies," and then I have to go, and my wife understands. I just have to go. It's like a once-a-week thing. That's how it all happened for me. So I totally hear what you say. A lot of people are like, "Oh, the weather's getting nice. Let's go outside." I'm like, "No, movies.
Let's go to the movies."
Yep.
You know what's crazy about that, though? I mean, so we'll talk about. We're not going to spoil anything here. So if you haven't watched Avengers Endgame, we're still not going to spoil it, even though it's been out at this point. You should have made it, bud. But a
lot of people did make it.
Yeah, a billion plus money wise. What I will say that's interesting is Endgame does sort of destroy that, because it used to be the case, right, that like the big movies were all in the summer and everything else was like art house stuff. Then it was sort of the case like the big movies were in the summer, and then Disney and a few other people threw out some big December ones. It is kind of crazy that the highest grossing movie probably ever, this is going to end up like and just shatter all records, came out in April. I guess that's close enough to either like sort of the end of school, but that certainly has changed. But I mean, Marvel's putting out like 3 movies a year. It kind of runs out of the perfect timing. So, go ahead.
I definitely...
that's the problem with it.
Go ahead.
No, buddy, go ahead.
I don't know what to say to that, Bo. I think you're right.
Well, so like we were talking before the end of the show about 2018 movies, and that there are good ones that people have missed them. I know that we kind of covered the angle of, well, Oscar people want it to be safe and everything like that. I guess what I think is interesting about it is, even with movies that I was throwing out that I thought were really good, some were highly original, being sort of... a snob and acting like I'm really cool. But part of it is just, I think people have, it's the difference between merely calling back nostalgia and then reworking ideas. So, Steve, you talked about the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which is really reworking multiple Western genres and also doing it in an interesting way, being on Netflix rather than, and in theaters at the same time. A Quiet Place being a very interesting take on monster movies, specifically trying to point out that, I mean, I'm taking audio away, right, as a sort of instigator of suspense. Into the Spider-Verse, frankly, one of the most innovative comic book movies in a long time. And then Sorry to Bother You and Blaze are, I don't know, probably too hard to describe within a few minutes. But the point is we have a lot of originality. We have a lot of people doing what we were talking about, where you take an old idea and really, in an interesting way, do something new. Steve, do you think part of it is just movies cost so much that people are worried about bombing? And maybe this isn't the worst idea in the world, because if you're a movie nerd enough, there's very famous movies that have bombed and failed, and you start to think about the money people will waste, millions of dollars to make a movie. Maybe they're just being responsible. Maybe this is green movie making. Steve, you ever thought about that? Huh?
That's a very valid consideration. I think that's right. We should always play it safe. But no, I mean, I think that is part of it. Of course, the money that you're spending should be, you want it to come back to you after it's done putting work in. But the other thing I think is, first of all, as usual, our lists are almost identical. It's kind of creepy, and we did not discuss. As you can see, we have no preparation for anything we do. But the few exceptions, like I really wanted to see that Blaze movie. But another one that you didn't mention, I don't know if you saw it or not, was Bad Times at the El Royale.
No,
which was a huge bomb. Okay, and there, I don't know, it was just a little too weird. It was kind of half a Tarantino thing, and it was like this disjointed storytelling from all angles thing. I don't know, I don't know why it bombed. I don't know why things worked, but I do know that, if you seek out movies and you know where to look, CatholicMovieGuide.com, that you will find valuable works of art, even in this age where so much that is pushed is either actively bad or just a retread. But back to the whole, what's the difference between Into the Spider-Verse and just, one of these like Lego, Spider-Man movies on Netflix or something?
Shot
like just
fired.
a retread versus something that innovates. And yeah, it's like the structure. It's kind of like, this may be a bad analogy, so feel free to step in. Like when you're at a good liturgy and you kind of get lost in the structure, there's a very rigid structure and you should be following it and that sort of thing. It allows you the freedom to not be preoccupied so much with the presentation, but with the meat and potatoes of praying and meditating. And similarly, if you have a common structure or common characters, then you don't have to spend all the time worrying about the plot twists and turns or who this character is. That heavy lifting's done for you. In a weird way, it allows you to be more creative and innovative. And there's no better example of that from last year than the Spider-Verse. I
think this is I think you've figured it all out, and we can wrap the show up like this 15 minutes early or whatever, because books are a really great place to world build. This is why almost every sort of like huge idea, Tolkien-esque, blah, 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 almost always ends up in a book first, right? Because since you don't have to attend to every minute detail, like where do I put the lamp in the scene, that you can make worlds in the books. But the thing is once you allow that to be established, right, so you don't have to invent the wheel every single frame of a movie, then really you can do the freedom of like, okay, well now how am I going to render this on screen? It's really sort of to Chesterton's point, right, about how freeing dogma is, right? That if like we know the boundaries of which we can't fall out, now we can make the game inside the boundary. And to me, I think that's right, Steve. The movies that get this understand the freedom of a boundary, right? The story has been made, and then the people who doggedly and woodenly try to just replicate what's going on, I mean, it's almost offensive. Like there's in robot AI stuff, what is it, the Turing test, right? The closer a robot gets to looking like a human but isn't, the more we're afraid of it, or the more it like repulses us. I saw a preview for the live-action Lion King, which is frame for frame the stinking cartoon, but just it looks like live CGI. And I thought that the robots, I mean, I was mortally offended that the robots were doing that. I don't even love The Lion King as much as some people, but I was brutally offended by them pulling this off. So I think that there's something, I think you really hit the nail on the head, Steve. Bud, do you think he's hit the nail on the head, or are you going to fight him?
No, I think you guys are onto something. And, sometimes it's standard characters like Spider-Man and Into the Spider-Verse, the way they took, what everyone knew about Spider-Man and built on it. But I know that you've mentioned this movie already, Bo, but A Quiet Place, it took the sort of science fiction thriller genre, and there's all sorts of expectations that are built into like what a film like that constitutes, and did something very creative with it. So I do think like unless you're just this amazing genius who comes up with a grand new movie idea, there can be something very, like, I find that my oldest daughter Malin now, like when she sees, for instance, like an Indiana Jones film, there are things that are supposed to be a part of that, and I think that's sort of a very biblical way of approaching filmmaking.
Well,
Yeah, and
go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to say that this is kind of in the world of art, this is like true traditionalism. So, traditionalists or traditionalism is caricatured as this rigid adherence where you're just, frame for frame reshooting The Lion King with people instead of cartoons.
Right.
But that's not true traditionalism. True traditionalism is learning from your forebears and then taking that and bringing it forward. So, for example, true creativity, I mean, that's a gift from God. They didn't call it the muse for nothing. Like, you can't explain it, but typically you will need some sort of learning or the framework to apply it. Like my 5-year-old can create some really interesting pictures, but it's not a work of art until there's some structure and I can get my bearings and figure out what's going on. I think that's exactly what we're talking about, the difference between, just kind of vomiting on the screen and a fit of creativity versus harnessing it by utilizing the structures that everyone is familiar with.
Well, and then the funny thing, right, is if you sort of do the yeoman's work of either, doing the tradition, learning the traditional things. I think of music, right? Everybody who innovates sort of is standing on the shoulder of everything that went before, all these things like this. But what's funny is sometimes the very thing that's accused of being sort of rote and spitting out the sort of same thing eventually will do something that could never have happened before. And funny enough, I'm going to throw out Avengers Endgame as truly a movie that never has happened. Now, why is this? Well, it's because they've made what is the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe at this point? Is it 15 movies?
Oh no, I think it's like 22.
22. So imagine making a movie that needs to wrap up 22 movies, and you go, never happened before. No one's ever made 22 movies that are supposed to have some semblance to each other and then fit together. And look, I'm even throwing out that there's legitimate criticisms that some of the movies, especially what they're calling Phase 3, were a little bit too much made to fit into the bigger universe. All of these things apply. We're not going to spoil anything with Avengers Endgame. Bud hasn't seen it. Steve and I have. But I'm going to say this. They truly made a new type of movie, which is this movie cannot stand alone. Like, you cannot watch this movie first. It would make no sense. And as a standalone movie, with sort of like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, I think people might be able to hem and haw about certain things that they chose. As a movie that wraps up 22 and really makes you think about all of them and really recapitulates stuff and hits, notes that people want it to hit, I actually think it's just a sterling masterpiece. I can't believe they pulled it off. And so the highest praise I have for that is it is a very satisfying movie. And that would sound like damning by faint praise, except in this case, I just really think they did it. They figured out how to wrap up 22 movies and have made something that has never been made in movies, which is a capstone to like a decade worth of a story. You agree, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this franchise and this particular final installment is just kind of it will define our era. Like, it is the ending of an era, not just in their universe, but in this era of filmmaking. Because I've gone through every stage of grief with Marvel. Like, I saw Iron Man and I was like, hey, that was really good. I can't believe they can make superhero movies that good,
And then saw
by
Hulk.
like 2012, you're like, okay, another Avengers.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah. And it's like, then you get like, everyone's like, this is the greatest thing ever. And like, well, no, not really. It's pretty good, but and then the people are like, this is the worst thing ever. This is a waste of time. These are just grown-up children in tights, and they're like, okay, let's settle down. We all like stories,
Right.
So, I mean, to have this burden and all this baggage, and the baggage, in a sense, is like you have all these debts that have to be paid off, but you also have all this structure that's in place. Like, again, without spoiling it, the emotional resonance that's wrought from what happens to characters in this movie would just not exist if you didn't have the other, 20 movies or whatever beforehand. It just couldn't. You could not do it, and you couldn't do it as efficiently and with such, economy as they did in this movie. Then again, also because it's the current year, it's just emblematic because in that 3 hours you get emotional resonance, you get action, you get everything, but you also have a couple like cringe-worthy, unnecessary nods to the PC era, which again makes it our film, And then really you have some quite underlying, quite traditional values, I think, espoused as far as the family and sacrifice and things like that. So I just, it's a nostalgia piece. It's another TV episode, but it's the best one. It's the MASH finale. It did everything. It was great.
And see,
and
I don't think
there is no perfect Marvel movie, but it's the closest, I would say.
so. And just this isn't ruining anything, but it even has a Coen Brothers Big Lebowski callback. So I don't see how it could go wrong.
Fantastic, by far the funniest part, I thought.
Yeah, no, it's just to sprinkle the salt in the wounds, but that you haven't seen it, just trust us on this one. The one thing that starts to be interesting about this, I think you say defining our era, even within the Marvel universe, like you said, there starts to be this give and take of like, here's movies that everybody watched, and then what's your next favorite movies, like, kind of defines what sort of weird family you are. Like Team Bonner is very much a pro Ant-Man movie. Like Ant-Man is probably one of our favorite family characters. I think that says a lot about us, and all good, frankly. No, I'm kidding. But this gets back to what we're starting to talk about, right, is you even think about when people take source material like Shakespeare and then decide to focus on, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, or going all the way back to the Bible and thinking about, okay, you could talk about Job, but what about, one of his friends, or, the fact that God talked about Behemoth and Leviathan. The idea that we have stories so that we can go fish out more stories, that humanity is the storytelling, community, and that this builds who we are. I think it's to our detriment if we look at something and say, oh, well, it's just superhero movies, it's just entertainment. I think about some of the previews that were going on. The only franchise that I think that gets close to Marvel Universe is, like, I think there's been 13 Fast and Furiouses, and what does that mean about us? I don't think that, like, you have to separate the fact that, hey, it's movie, it's just entertainment, but also it says something about us. Like, I don't think movies need to preach at us or anything like this. But I do think it starts to warrant us to take an hour here on the radio and say, really, a lot of this is constitutive of what sort of community we have and what sort of community we think we can become.
Well, what I don't get about
and
go ahead, Steve.
Oh, go ahead, bud.
No, I think you're building on Bo's points. I'm going to firmly pass the ball to you.
I love Bud Moore. He is the best of us. You're so deferential. I was just going to say that that whole type about, like, this character, that character versus me. I mean, that's humanity. Like, you want to identify with an archetype in the story. Like, you watch the Ninja Turtles, you got your favorite Ninja Turtle. You watch a biblical epic, you think, I'm not Moses, I'm Aaron. I don't know, because we all have our part to play. We're all kind of play acting to try to figure out our place here, and there's no one type of person. There's no one type of saint that gets to heaven. So it's really natural that, the best works of art are going to try to have something for everyone, and that you can try to figure out, see, this is how I'm trying to do things, and maybe I'm doing a decent job at it in my life.
I hope this isn't kind of like a silly aside, but have you guys thought about, we probably have friends who are actually nerdier than us, I've got a couple guys in mind, maybe related to Bo, who, like, their knowledge of the Marvel Universe actually exceeds their knowledge of Scripture. And what's the kind of balance with, like, like movies?
Oh, you're talking about my brother. Okay, go ahead. I'm tracking now. Yes.
Movies can be like an evangelistic inroads, and I've even seen, like Bo at Duke, there was a minister who would have, like, these movie nights and then talk about them. Of course, the best place to go is your favorite movie podcast.
That's right.
But is there a way, is there a way where we can overdo this? Like, I guess with our children, part of it is just, like, balancing out. Like, catechesis should exceed theater time.
Well, no, so on this, but I think this goes actually to prove Steve's point about, like, wooden following, and then also sort of being like your guys' two favorite word, grist for the mill, statement, grist for the mill of their imagination. So, like, my kids now firmly are making up all sorts of stories, continuing on with all of the Marvel Universe people, and they like really weird people. Like, they wanted Marvel toys, so we went out and bought them, and, like, so who is it? It's Ant-Man, Scarlet Witch, the Wasp, and I think Groot, and it's all these characters that I posted on one time, like, I knew all of them from comic book land, but I can't believe that like that's what that's what my kids like. But it serves for them to like come up with more stories and things like this. So the idea, right, is that I think kids will exclude the Gospels from their lives caring about sort of major franchises if they have no imagination that exceeds woodenly following what these franchises do. So I actually think it's something more at root that if you get that right, you don't have to worry at all about them watching these things. But I don't know. I think that it's almost sort of like bad interpretations and reading of the scripture follow all the way up, and that's where Marvel replaces Jesus. I don't know. Does that make sense, Steve?
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say you can overdo it in kind of two ways, right? So one is just like over binging on entertainment, as a distraction only. Which I mean, we need distractions, of course, but if you make that kind of the thing, then you have these people who spend 25 hours straight playing video games and they forget to wash themselves or eat, and then you have the breakdown of society. So that's one thing, just the elevation of it as a pleasure delivery vehicle.
Right.
But what you're talking about, I think, also is a little more, which is you turn it into sort of, instead of a story from a human trying to communicate certain things to humans, as sort of a gospel thing where you almost follow it like a religion. And you brought up The Big Lebowski earlier. There is an actual church of The Big Lebowski. I would bet there's a Harry Potter sort of a church and that sort of things, and they become a substitute for religion. So, yes, that is bad. But if instead you put them in their proper place, you limit them, and you use them, again, interacting with a Catholic mindset as a communication tool of deeper human truths in a way that's more palatable and more understandable or fun, then I think you can use it as a service to living out a good life, as Bo said, rather than something that impedes it, which it certainly could.
The Church of the Big Lebowski, I'm betting, met twice, and then it fizzles out.
Right? Oh no, they don't have meetings.
Yeah,
that would be so undude.
Yeah. Well, we have to. We're getting ready to run out of time here, Steve. It's just been too fun, and we can talk more if we wanted. Where can people go find more Catholic Movie Guy wisdom if they are so inclined?
Absolutely. When you go to this website, I don't want you to think it's like a defunct Angel Fire site. It's a real website run by a human. It still exists. I just am busy. CatholicMovieGuy.com. But I should have, hopefully with Bo Bonner, I don't know if Bud's available or if he's seen a movie, but hopefully a podcast coming soon this week as well.
All right, fantastic. Well, Steve, the Catholic Movie Guy, Steve Wichmer, we'll, of course, have him back as much as we can. This has been The Uncommon Good. For Bud Marr, this is Bo Bonner. We'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.